Think it's time we rise up, people. It's time's up, people. You can talk all you want, but it won't change a thing. I wanna know what you do.
When I got my ticket into this program, as a participant, I was completely beaten down by my addiction. By ticket, I mean my felony charges. I was living out of doors and already on warrant for another case. I'd been selling drugs to support my habit. I was engaged in all of the behaviors that come with full-blown addiction and sacrifice of everything worthwhile in my life. I did not possess the ability to show up as a parent. I was a thief, and I was bankrupt in all departments, from my pockets to my morality. For the 16 years leading up to my final arrest, addiction had sucked the life out of me, and I left a wake of destruction from Massachusetts to Washington in the process. My arrest for selling heroin to an undercover officer was an extreme low for someone like me who watched one of their closest friends die of an opiate overdose in 2007. I remember coming into Monday morning orientation at drug court after completing the transitional recovery program at the MRJC, having a good 100 days substance free, and asking myself, how in the hell am I going to continue to stay sober out here? My previous experiences showed me that when I get released back out here onto 3rd Avenue, for the life of me, I can't recall how awful it was living out there, getting arrested, spending a week or two in withdrawal and custody, and I would resign myself to that same exact cycle over and over again.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Up and Up. My name is Jody Newell, and I have a great guest to introduce to you today. His name is Joe Conniff. Joe, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Jody. Thanks for having me on here today. My name is Joe Conniff. I live in Seattle, Washington. I'm a recently published author, person in long-term recovery from a substance use disorder, also a post 9/11 military veteran, recovery advocate, and I currently do work now as a certified peer counselor, recovery coach slash resource specialist with a local drug diversion court here in the Seattle area.
Amazing. So, tell us a little bit about your story, kind of where you're coming from. I think that's what really attracted me to you in general. So, tell us a little bit about where you're coming from.
So I grew up in New England. I'm gonna try to just kind of give some context here. And, I was a, 15, 16-year-old teenager at the turn of the century. And a lot of what was happening at that time was, the opioid crisis was escalating. And I grew up in a very opiate overprescribed household. And, what I thought was the norm in my life. I believe it was and is the norm for a lot of people of my generation, as we're coming to find out with current events and so much work around opioid litigation. Is I was raised in a household where a lot of the life experiences were addiction and mental health and depression and um, internal dilemmas being met with external solutions. And I ended up kind of becoming a product of that environment. And bounced around looking for relief and different things. And that started with my own substance use disorder in my late teens, as I was wrapping up high school. And so I ended up kind of in this, running from myself, running from discomforting reality. And the things that I thought were going to be coming to fruition in my life. And ended up becoming a service member in the US Navy. And just kind of continued taking myself and my, I want to say delusional, but it's really what it was, delusional perspectives about facing and confronting reality like into my life, as I kind of just traveled and ended up on a path of self-destruction with my substance use. And compromising careers and relationships, and just really trying to figure out, like, who am I, where am I going with my life. And before I knew it, it had a decade and a half had passed, and I found myself experiencing an intervention which I never thought was going to happen, and on the streets of Seattle as a homeless heroin addict at that point. And it was kind of like, whoa, what the hell happened? Since seemed like I was just turning 18 not too long
Surprise.
ago, and thinking my life was taking shape. So
Yeah. Yeah, I want to just kind of dig in a little bit. I really liked what you said about, internal conflict, and it was like an external solution to an internal problem. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit? Tell me what you mean by it.
Sure. So I think it's easiest to get context of something that, um, like pain relief. So, living with chronic pain. And so that was kind of the situation that I was accustomed to, as my mother was in an accident um, some years before I was born. And so she had this back injury in which, one of the solutions, 6 or 7 surgeries and operations and, medical procedures into it was like, well, what about Oxycontin? Have we tried this yet? We've tried all these, surgical procedures, and which, I guess could be classified as an external solution, which is, thanks to the medical field, like, a lot of help in that regards. But we knew very little about the addictive qualities of opioids at that time. And so what I saw for my mom to function in my household was very much, reaching for a little orange bottle with a white top, and that got her up and going. And I felt like for a period of time there, um, I got my parent back, or I got, a parent in my life. And um, subconsciously, I think I that really became ingrained in me. As I also grew up with, alcoholism in my life. And so, at family events and somebody passed on and things of that nature, it was always external stuff, like buy this, drink this, smoke that, those kind of things. And didn't realize how much that really played into my understanding of when I'm having an emotion, when I'm having a difficult experience, what can I do? And it didn't happen until, for me, it didn't become an issue until I actually, you know, drugs and alcohol provided a solution. They provided some kind of relief from a dilemma that I was experiencing that I didn't otherwise know how to handle myself. I didn't have the resources, the resiliency, the emotional support, because that wasn't accessible with a mother who was, heavily medicated, and I had a father who was, just trying to make ends meet, and he worked for a criminal organization at the time. And so there were certain things we didn't talk about. And so relief was very much coming from external sources. And I think about 1999, 2000, choose your own adventure, for the most part, it very much became prescription substances in a white, very suburban, kind of rural middle class household. And so, of course, it wasn't seen as addiction. It was like, I've got a prescription for this. And so, very much shaped a whole period of my life in which I realized, wow, I was just, not awake to what was really transpiring.
Hmm. That's really interesting. I have a friend here in New Hampshire who is a harm reduction advocate. And what he talks about a lot, what is kind of ringing a bell for me, is what he talks about a lot, and what resonates with me when he says it is that, is that it's a solution to a problem. Like there's the problem. There's a problem there. Like there's an emotion there. There's something there that needs dealing with. And so this is something that that resolves that in the moment, right? It doesn't necessarily resolve it for the long term. But the thing is that if you're actually going to resolve it for the long term, you have to actually look at the problem, not just, kind of give something to it. And so that kind of leads me to mindfulness, right? And so that's that's something that you're so how do you think mindfulness kind of plays into in the context of an internal problem that needs a solution that's better than, opiates or alcohol or something like that?
It's a great question. This is why I think I love
I'm
so
throwing
much.
you on the spot. I'm sorry.
No, this is great. I've been around different literature as I was, coming into my own recovery process. It's just coming up on 6 years on Friday. Um, and so, really reflecting lately on like what has evolved and what has been the most reliable tool for my recovery. And it's been mindfulness. And I think it's, and looking at the context in which in many cases I come across that I find addiction or alcoholism discussed, is it's a flight from reality. Right? It's like, so that, like you were talking about with your friend, as we find a discomforting experience, it's Gabor Mate says it's my attempt to solve a problem in my life. And it's misguided, but only in the long term, because it works for a little bit, right? And so it's, you can't deny that. Otherwise, why would we engage in it in the first place? And so when I look at mindfulness in the terms of, if addiction's a flight from reality, mindfulness is about being here, non-judgmental, present time awareness, like paying attention on purpose, right? And so that to me is the exact opposite of addiction. That to me, like mindfulness is recovery. To me, is it's really about getting here and being with, you know, the full catastrophe experience of being human, which is sometimes it's really great, sometimes it's it's not. And looking at the relationship and mindfulness practices is really trying to get down to causes and conditions, hence the title of my book. But we really start to see where craving and aversion in our life come to fruition, in which craving, not just addiction itself, but wanting things to be different than they are, so then being in conflict with reality, meeting things with hatred or intolerance, pushing things away, that's that aversion component. And really starting to see where that occurs in the internal landscape, because then that tends to manifest outwardly, as it's and mindfulness is really refining, at least in my experience, it's refining my attention and the internal landscape to see that start to arise. And so that's been my experience with it, as to really understanding how it serves me. And I think the context in which it fits into the scope of supporting recovery, and making the journey from active addiction to actually trying to just be here. Is it's a practice too. It's just as much as addiction and using substances is a practice in itself. Mindfulness is a practice. It takes cultivation. It takes energy and effort, and that's about trying to get here, trying to arrive here in this moment.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your book. I mean, I know causes and conditions. I mean, tell us a little bit about what that talks about.
So the title is really rooted in my experiences of mindfulness, and I be what you consider a like a Dharma practitioner, very much Buddhist based recovery. I've had plenty of experiences with 12 step, with yoga of 12-step recovery. I used a lot of drugs and alcohol, so I think I used a lot of recovery stuff. And, full buffet of substances, full
Yeah,
buffet of recovery. And I'm very much heavy on mindfulness in the Dharma right now. But causes and conditions is definitely it's a couple of terms that I find consistent throughout a lot of the literature around mindfulness, and historical context of Buddhism and the Dharma, and in the lineage that I practice, which is more out of the Thai forest tradition. And so I've also seen it in 12-step programs too, is it's, people talk about in the sense of doing inventory, doing this self-reflection. And I see it a little bit more on the mindfulness side of things, is it's really looking for those causes and conditions. Where does my relationship to reality and to things outwardly, where does it start? I got to get down to causes and conditions, and that starts with turning inward rather than outwardly. Again, it's total opposite of the way that I operated in my substance use disorder. And so I felt like the title of that would really, I was kind of trying to appeal to the mindfulness, I think I would say community a little bit. That would be a catchphrase that people, oh, maybe this guy's going to talk about maybe the Dharma a little bit. Maybe there'll be some mindfulness practice in there. It's not really heavy on it, but it's near and dear to me, and my experience is what's brought the most value to my recovery is getting down to causes and
I
conditions.
think a lot of times what really catches me is talking about, I guess, is going deeper with it, where it seems like the solutions that we have as a society seem to be very superficial and very, um, okay, we're at the end of it. What do we do now? Whereas I think that there are a lot of practices that could probably be very helpful if we were to kind of preempt things. And we talk about crime prevention, or we talk about, whatever. Well, in this case, first of all, I don't think it should be a crime in the first place. But aside from that, the idea that prevention and catching people in advance of where they're at, right? And so the way that we the way that we look at substance use has a lot to do with where people end up with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
So that's what attracted me to it. And I'm sorry because I was just laughing before this because I tried as hard as I could, but I got 2 kids, man, and I tried to finish reading this book and it did not work very well for
That's
me.
all right. That's all right. It's not going anywhere. It'll be available to you whenever you can get to it.
I'm
So
still looking for it. I didn't buy it to read it before this, but I wanted to read it before this. I'm kind of curious, especially considering that you work in, you were talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you said diversion court.
correct.
Okay.
Correct. Drug diversion. Yep.
And so actually, well, I mean, first off, right off the bat, because I know that different states, this is something that is a state to state difference, right? So what it looks like in New Hampshire is going to probably look different than what it looks like in Washington. So tell me a little bit about what does it look like in your context? What does diversion court do?
Yeah. So, and you're absolutely correct about that. It's diversion courts have been around. What do you call them? Diversion court, problem solving court, therapeutic court, and I'm even quick to say that they're not all therapeutic. They I think they began about 1989, 1990. I was around as a response to the cocaine influx down in Florida, down in Miami. I think Dade County was actually one of the first ones to start one off. And so the one that I work at, King County Drug Diversion Court, and to be clear, just nothing I say is a reflection of King County's ideas on things. It's my personal experience, and it's one of those statements I have to make. But
Yeah, gotcha.
so our program has been around since 1994, and it was really designed to be an off ramp from the criminal legal system, which at the time was very much heavily focused on the people coming in were in there for possession charges, for delivery charges. At the time, saw very, very few property crimes, those kind of things. And so, but the program entails always getting people connected to treatment, getting people connected to resources, and, having it be tied to a government agency as you have, these partnerships with community agencies, with public health, where it's easy to leverage resources and you get an opportunity to introduce accountability to, a population that I think is, when diversion courts came out, it says, okay, well, we're not totally sold on the disease model. We're not totally leaving behind the moral component, or the choice model. And so this is a mix of both of those. And so I think
Through my role as resource specialist and peer counselor, I have the opportunity to work with clients on their empowerment plans. In doing so, I work with them in formulating short and long-term goals and a comprehensive effort to keep them from cycling back through addiction and harmful behaviors. It really is amazing to hear someone come in for the first time and say that they got their driver's license back, their first job, or their first job on the books, or are scheduling visits with their children for the first time in months or even years for some of us. All of this happens here in King County Drug Diversion Court. Every Monday morning, I get a fresh perspective on what it's like out there still when new clients come through the door and I see or hear a piece of my past or story. I always mention to them that drug court asked me to do a lot of things, but never anything quite as absurd as drugs and alcohol had already asked of me. For that, I'm truly grateful to this program and the process of recovery for allowing me to experience 2 lives in one lifetime. Thank you.
And so I think at the time, it was a good foot forward, but it's also because there's not a consistent model throughout the nation, and it has a lot to do with politics. It has a lot to do with community belief systems and who's impacted by substance use and what's the color of their skin and those kind of things. And so, what we're seeing now, I can speak for our program, is we just had a state Supreme Court decision and Washington State that is now changed what simple possession looks like, and then for the last few years in our program specifically, we've been focused on property crimes, which are, crimes that are fueled by substance use disorder that are impacting other members of the community. We've been trying to move away from criminalizing simple possession and, people just being caught using in the community. And that's been a larger response locally. Those have been things that, policymakers and community officials have kind of agreed on it. And surely not what's happening in other places around the country. But the program still serves as is an opportunity for accountability, is a connection to resources. People have to be charged with a eligible felony or multiple felonies. It's a pre-adjudication model, which means that like people are voluntarily signing up, like they can take their case to the mainstream court system if they choose to. So this is a voluntary program people choose to participate in. And if they complete the program, then they can have their felony charge or charges dismissed. And so, in the sense of, great, we're getting rid of felony charges if people complete the program. But the truth of it is in some cases, people don't complete the program. So the reality of conviction, the reality of it not being a therapeutic process for certain members of the community historically affected adversely by the war on drugs and police brutality and things like that, it's not necessarily a safe space. And so we're really at a crossroads, I feel like, now where I can speak for the program that I work in, which I'm also a graduate of. That's a program that saved my life, due to a police intervention over selling $10 of heroin to an undercover cop. I mean, it's like, looking back at it now, is I'm really appreciative for that intervention. And I realize it's not the one that's helping everybody else. I'm a white guy, like there's a lot of privilege I have and support and minimal interaction with the system beforehand that I can credit to, why it worked well for me. Okay. So we're at this place now where it's like, we try to be, as a program, being one of the oldest ones in the nation, trying to really be out at the forefront of best practices and doing everything we can be doing to be trauma informed and causing less harm, and so there's a lot of people that disagree with this, with therapeutic courts, and I I understand that. And I'm also, I think that the challenge is we're at a place now is where even if we remove the idea of simple possession, we have, and I can speak from my experiences, that I was, vehicle prowling, I was stealing from other members of the community. Is what is a response in which every aspect, every member of the community is heard about how we're addressing substance use. And I feel like, there's a way to move away from that as a whole. But right now, the current model in which we have, where people are in crisis and motivated to steal to support addiction or their basic needs, kind of very late stage capitalist society. And in my view is, it's hard to it's very difficult to eradicate the scope of addiction that we're experiencing in our communities. And so I feel like we're at this place where this is the response that we have. We have integrations of harm reduction and criminal legal system and law enforcement assisted diversions. And so we have this, there's kind of this meter. We have, all the way over here, we have harsh criminal legal system. And all the way over here, we have, people in the streets using, with no repercussions. And I'm not saying there should be, and I'm not saying criminalizing is the way, but it's like, I feel like, recovery in and of itself is about balance. And as a system, we're not striking a balance. That is, how I experience. And I'm like, there's so many difficult conversations that need to be had right now about what is a middle path?
Yeah. Well, I wonder, I like you talked about, kind of this resistance to even, to, I'm sorry, you call it diversion courts. I mean, we just call it like drug courts. You know what I mean? There's like drug court here and this or whatever. But so I mean, just to be clear, like my position in this is that we legalize and we make sure that we reduce the harm as much as possible. And when it comes down to it, for me, I mean, what that really comes down to for me is not only because I've been through the experience, my two boys are growing up without a dad because they because of in my opinion, because of the way that it was handled. It just kind of went from this process of, one day we found out that his OxyContin habit had turned into a heroin habit, and that was because he was pulled over by the state police, and within a year he was dead. That's what it comes down to for me. So it's like we went through this whole process, and you have this strain hanging over your head, this threat hanging over your head. It cuts you off from your community and all these different things. And we may not necessarily agree on exactly where that lands and what are the solutions with all of that. But to my mind, it's just keep people alive until they can make that decision. I've met a lot of people who have actually been through it, and you stand there at the wake and watch all these people go by, and these people who actually made it, and you think, the only thing was that they stayed alive. They made it. They made it because they were alive. They hit the bottom of the barrel, but they're okay because they're still alive, right? And so to me, That's where it comes down to me. What I'm wondering about is, when you're talking about kind of getting a resistance to divergence courts and things like that, what do you find that the argument is against it? I think, and let me just preface this really quickly, right? Because I don't mean to take
Sure.
up too much time, but I think, really when it comes down to it and you look at the research about what the effect is of criminalization, and then what is the effect of not necessarily people out on the streets, but um oh, why am I blanking on the name? But safe injection sites, or something like that, where the examples that I've heard about are places where it's basically like literally like a 4-level building, right? It's
Sure.
like you come
Yeah.
in and you're off the street and you're like, I just need a safe place that I'm not going to die, right? Then you're like, okay, there's that. You got clean syringes, you have that, whatever. Once you're ready to move on up and say like, hey, you know what? I'm still, but you're surrounded by community, so you're not cut off from your community. So you're in this place where, at the very least, people don't want you to die. There are people there who don't want you to die, right? And then
Sure.
you, all right,
Sure.
if you're ready to take the next step and say, all right, well, I'd really like to start weaning myself off of this. Okay, then you can move up to the next step, and then the next, and it's literally floors actually in the example that I've heard, but even if it weren't something like that, what I wonder is there's kind of like this resistance to it, and it comes down to, honestly, it comes down a lot, I think, to stigma, and people kind of assuming something about people who use drugs or something like that, and that's where I'm coming from, or like at least the experience that I've had as a barrier to it. Not to mention, of course, the police unions and things like that, who I mean, this is part of what they, if everything, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, I mean, that's what I
Sure. Oh
attribute
yeah.
that to. Okay. They think they're doing a good job. All right. I don't think you're a bad person, but I think you have the wrong solution. But anyway, I'm curious, in your experience, what kind of feedback you've gotten from people, or pushback from people, to even diversion courts, which the reason I laid out the idea of like having like a safe injection site is because that seems to be, or let me go over here, lefty, like way left, or way off the barrel. And then there's,
Yeah.
so I do feel like this is a balance, just in the way that you've described it. And so I'm curious what kind of pushback you would get to something that seems to be a pretty good middle ground.
You know what I think, in the way that I experience it, and I'm confronted with it in our community, is I think is it's we have people that are all of us have an intention to help a population that is experiencing substance use disorder, mental health crisis, and homelessness. And we're all doing it with our own specific hammer, so to speak.
Right, right.
And because many of us sit in spaces together, and in functions, and in the Zoom rooms these days, and we're in there, but so many of us are not getting the experience of what these folks on this side are doing out in the community on the street. Those folks over there aren't getting the experience of the folks of the population that we're working with, that in a lot of cases, the high risk, the high needs individuals that come into our program, they're not working with that population. And I think everybody has the right, everybody's like, we want to serve them, and everybody's, we have folks that are social workers on this side of it. We have folks that are social workers on this side. We have folks that are like, syringe exchange, harm reduction, fentanyl test strips. We distribute naloxone at our programs. We realize, like, it's an abstinence-based model. Once folks they want to start to, progress through the program. But we realize that, like, part of it is reducing harm in that process, and I think what it is there's a lack of understanding, like, of, and people are like, and the issue is it's always about funding, right? Like, everybody's like, I need to get the programs that I'm doing funding. And when we believe in those things that we're doing, it's like, but this is what I do. This, and especially right now during COVID, it's like, money on the table is going to go to somewhere else if we don't find a way to use it. And I think that's tightened up the conversation. And so I feel like in recent months, kind of just what I've experienced in the local landscape is, especially because it's like Seattle PD got a very very bad rap over the summer with the protests and the autonomous zone that was happening up in Capitol Hill. And so like, the community together has been like, well, we don't want them involved. And it's like, is in our system, in the criminal legal side, is it's like, we don't necessarily, I mean, there's a way to evolve it. We don't necessarily need the police. There's a way to, I think, incorporate community courts and diversion courts and those things into a capacity in which can work side by side with boots on the ground and help people resolve outstanding legal matters and start to evolve the system with this opportunity, with this massive push for decriminalization and understanding the nature of harm reduction in the community. But like I said, is right now is the thing so locked into like, but we have the people here. That's how we have them in our program. So we need to get them connected to the services that they need. And the people in the boots on the ground are like, but we've got to distribute naloxone. We've got to do these things. And again, it's a later stage addressing of just a symptom of causes and conditions that we're not getting down to.
Right.
I think it's, so we're really I think everybody, except for in places where it's just really like, no, we don't even want to do a therapeutic court. We're that far not left.
Right.
We're just like everybody, it's a moral failing. And that's it. And so I think right now it's really about getting people to the table from both sides of direct service. They're both direct service, being in the streets, being in the criminal legal system. And I feel like at least where I'm at in Seattle is we're doing the best we can with the systems we have to operate in, and the pushback I get is it's like, that's not the best intervention, having them in the criminal legal system. And I'm also somebody who agrees leaving people out in the street, gets people accustomed to a continued cycle of trauma and those things. And so what I say for me is, I talk about in the book, is being in jail for me as a white male, it's far less traumatic than having to survive another day out in the alley in the streets. That's my experience. And I'm not advocating that for everybody else, but realizing the trauma that's incurred with cycles of homelessness and mental health crisis and substance use disorders out in the street, this massive public health concern that we have. I asked, like, when is decriminalization without proper treatment, without proper accountability? And I'm not saying it has to come just from the criminal legal system, but when is decriminalization and a hands-off policy just as oppressive as trying to arrest your way out? And so that's where I'm like, balance has to be met somewhere where people are all at the table together, and I agree with getting everybody the services and the harm reduction needs that make public health a priority. And it's realizing that just letting people be out of doors, which is what I feel like I've experienced in Seattle, is like, really, there's not some people that could benefit from these resources? Is there a way to give folks a try? Is there a way to integrate these systems? And it's another spot that I touch on in the book is in a path moving forward, the closing chapter of the book, as I say, any reliance on the criminal legal system should only be seen as an opportunity to provide extra accountability and for victim related crimes inflicted on other members of the community, not for simple possession. And like, we're at a point now where simple possessions are not getting filed into our drug court. It's done. And so I'm like, we're officially at that place now where we're working with people that are having an impact on other community members. And if we really want that to change, legalization has to happen. Like, safer supply of narcotics has to happen. That's decriminalization in a sense has to happen in that capacity. And then it gives us an opportunity, in my belief, to actually move away from it. And we can turn facilities that have been used for incarceration for the high 60-something% of people that are behind bars for substance use disorders and mental health, actually turn them into public health facilities that are focused on current and recovering drug user health. And then the system starts to shift. And the criminal legal system really is only there as a way to be responsive to the other needs of the community, in which the other community members feel heard, that impacted by this, but it's also restorative. It's gives people the still the off ramp, and so that's what I see as like, it's like trying to get to a point where we can actually move, the needle further that direction. But there's policy and things that have to happen, which I feel like, due to greed and capitalism and things like that, is it's hard to take the focus off of, let's just treat symptoms, like we're comfortable pulling them out. Don't want to find out where they're coming in, So
Yeah, absolutely. Trump, this whole thing, this is my bit. I thought it was so maddening. Trump, this whole, what was it, the opiate Crisis Task Force or something. It was something close to that, right? I remember Chris Christie was like heading it or something.
Yeah, I
But
remember hearing about this.
but it's this whole thing, and then at the end of the day, they spent I want to say it was like 9 or 10 months where they were like, "Oh yeah, we're like working on things and looking into stuff." And then at the end of the day, it's like, "Oh yeah, we're just going to push more pharmaceuticals at it." And here's the thing. I think that a pharmaceutical solution and harm reduction in that way is great for some people. It is not
Yeah.
the only answer. And so a lot of times what happens is this kind of oversimplification. Hence my attraction to your book is Causes and Conditions, because it's not just talking about, oh, well, here we have this problem that we want to fix and we're going to, come up with something where, where someone else is going to profit from it. The same companies that were fine with sending opiates into McDowell County by the millions above what, people who actually live there. Those same companies are producing medical, pharmaceutical solutions to that problem. It's just like, okay.
And you can't see the business model that's running here. I mean, for some, obviously we're aware of it, but the community members that are like, and that's another part that I have a difficult time with is people are like, we're going to get everybody treatment. We're going to get Suboxone on demand. I'm like, Suboxone by itself is not treatment. Like it's Suboxone. It's a stepping stone.
Right.
And I'm all for it. I am for it. And like, let's stop talking about it as if that in and of itself is holistic treatment, because that is not, again, getting down to causes and conditions. And one of my favorite statements in the book was true prevention comes from undoing the unjust systems that we are forced to operate and live within in a capitalist society. Like that's prevention. Like, and I'm all for, like, we can prevent overdose related deaths by some things, some public health measures and harm reduction in our community, naloxone distribution, safer supply. But if we don't remove the need and for which people find refuge in drugs and alcohol, we're never going to actually reach a stage of prevention in which we can say, yeah, we're actually preventing substance use and addiction from flourishing in our community. Like it's going to exist, in my belief, for people. It always has. But to the capacity that we're confronted with addiction in our society right now is a byproduct of, severe dislocation that happens because of racism, classism, sexism, all these other things that are hallmarks of our society, and it's just kind of, it's baffling to me because I understand that advocacy is about changing the system from within. And I believe in electing officials that have lived experience. And this is a lot of these things are things that I talk about in the later chapters of the book is, dismantling patriarchy, dismantling intolerance and those things. And that even starts by doing it in the rooms, in the 12-step communities that have been intolerant as recent as 50, 60 years ago, having, Black men of color stand in the backs of meetings, in the Midwest and things like that is, this is our recent history. It's not much different than when we look at, oppression of racism against African Americans and Black folks. This is just, there's so much work that needs to happen in the political landscape that can be, I feel like, compounded with the other social justice movements, for racial equity, for the Black community, for Asian and Pacific Islanders. It's right now, it's really changing the individuals that represent that system. I'm like, if recovery advocacy is a movement, has to part ways with the people that represent the existing system, and creating something else that is actually representative of the people that have experienced the broken system, that have experienced being sidelined and marginalized and subjected to the war on drugs, to, titles like felon, addict, derogatory aspects of the LGBTQ community, having those labels thrown at them rather than being acknowledged. And it's like introducing those people, those faces and voices into town halls and policy meetings. And those are the things that I see that it's happening. We have a lot of it, I'm proud to say, in Washington State. But it's like we realize how hard people are pushing back on that in other states as we speak. Like right now, it's like breaking news headlines like voter suppression and those things. And it's like, who benefits from the status quo of profiting off of our misery and the suffering in our communities, to where the only relief we can get is not a social handout, it's drugs and alcohol. And so again, best attempt to solve a problem. Like, how can you criminalize that?
You know, I really try to lift up as much as I possibly can. I mean, they call it deaths of despair. You know, I mean, I've lost my children's father to opiate use, and I lost my brother just a couple of years ago to alcoholism. You know what I mean? And I think that they're different substances, but they're two sides of the same coin. I mean, it's the same. It's part of the same. Yeah, we have a serious problem. People are not doing okay. I guess I'll just
No,
put it that way.
especially in COVID.
Yeah, my God. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that at the end of this, we're going to have a lot of checking in to do. We're going to have a lot of, we're going to have a lot of people we're going to have a lot to sort out at the end of it, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm very vocal about, kind of what I've been going through during COVID. And I think that, every time I post something or something like that, I'll get 4 or 5 messages from people saying thank you for saying that, but they won't comment on it themselves, they won't post themselves, but you know that there's a lot of people that's going through it. And that's just my own anecdotal experience, but I mean, it's just, I've never gotten so much of a response from people as just acknowledging that, hey, guess what, shit's hard right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. What you mentioned that is your children's father to opioids, and then you said your brother to alcohol, right? And it's just the conflicting nature of this is one is so stigmatized and one is so socially acceptable, and both just as lethal. I mean, alcohol statistically, but it's amazing that have the same outcome for things that are perceived two totally different ways in the society. It's kind of like, how do we end up there? And it's like, this is where, forget about the things like the iron law of prohibition and what happened with alcohol and the influx of stronger substances when you regulate one rather than actually create a safe supply, which is how we ended up coming out of prohibition for alcohol, right? Is
Right.
so here we are, tighten the grip on, the cartel, black tar heroin and other influxes of things, which I'm not blaming it directly on. That's just another byproduct of meeting a need. Like, can't blame, that's just capitalism taking its course, and individual ability. But it's like, that's how we ended up with fentanyl. Is it's like, well, we've got to get more bang for the buck. So, now we can't transfer a brick of black tar over here on the West Coast. Now we've got fentanyl pressing and those things. And so it's just like the iron law coming to fruition again 100 years later. And so we haven't learned anything, and I laugh about it, and it's not funny, but it's like, that's the insanity of it, in which the things that are discussed in the rooms of recovery is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And the larger community that laughs at the things that we do in church basements or fellowship halls, yet that's what we're doing as a society in our response to this. And it's like the contradictory nature of this entire thing. Is the other thing I mentioned in the book is this is the issue, is Americans are much like addicts when it comes to politics, is we accept whatever relief we can as elections and things come up, and whatever's going to get us closest to feeling okay, and would not do the work to go chase the good political dope, like,
You
whoever.
are so right. I never thought about it that way. I'm sorry. Keep going.
But I mean, but that's really like, this realization I had in the last couple of years is, I've been in recovery, since 2015, and so I've watched these couple like really circusy election cycles where it's like, this is progressive because it's undoing the policies of the last person. Like, that's not change. That's accepting a little bit of relief. And then the fact of the matter that's so hard to hear is the people that have fought for so long for civil rights and other things saying we have to do this to make progress, when it's not progress, when it's just getting back a little bit of what we had. So it's like, how can we expect to make actual progress on things that people are using for relief from what that society, from what that political system is creating? Like, we don't have an interest in actually solving the addiction crisis. We're just throwing money at band-aids when we're not realizing the fact of what actually produces the need to find the large scale, relief from drugs and alcohol that we're seeing in our society. That's my personal take on it. Is And it seems, and I'm like, I'm hopeless in the whole thing.
I mean, I could agree with you more. I mean, I think when it comes down to it, I mean, whatever. You want to have like some type of resolution, and you want to have like, okay, this is what we're gonna do, and then it's gonna kind of actually fix things, especially, if you're criticizing what doesn't actually fix things. But, I guess, hold on, I want to bring it back to something you said earlier, and I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. But it was kind of just, oh, this is gonna piss me off because I'm not gonna think of it. It was something like, you know, never mind, never mind. I'm never gonna think of it. Forget it. Cut that out. Whatever. Anyway,
That's
no.
okay. If it comes to you, let me know.
But it was, oh, what was it? It was something like, all right, never mind. I'm just gonna cut it out. But you know what? I think, I don't know. I wish I could end it with something like, but we keep trying, like, but we keep, and I get that, and I want to keep like that optimism, and I want to keep that, I want people to, to be encouraged and to have something to do. But, it's really, I agree with what you're saying. Or at least what I think you're saying is that, this is what the system produces. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Oh
we're
yeah.
so we're kind of trying to like fix these problems at the end of the road, but at the same time, like, all along this road, you've set up this road with all kinds of obstacles and fucked up shit that
Exactly.
that you know
Exactly.
what I mean? Then it's like, why would you expect anyone to get anywhere else but than where they're at?
I
This is
think,
a really bad
like, and
analogy, but I'm going with it. I'm sticking.
I love that, like how you said, is it's, you've created the road to this point, and I think, and it can end on a good note. I mean, the reality is like I said, is we're even seeing it here in Washington State. We've seen it in other places where people with lived experience are getting elected into local office, and I think, what the advocacy movement started as, and we're just talking about how we handle making changes to address substance use disorder and mental health crisis and everything that comes with that, homelessness, public health, all these other, things that are tied to that web, is advocacy was really, took this big shift of like people sharing their experiences at, town halls, legislative forums, people starting to get vocal, celebrities, other people writing books about the experience of it. It's really like, and there was so much support and encouragement to get behind people to share their story at that level. And I think, the next wave of encouragement really needs to be is to get people into local politics. And like,
Mm.
and I think, where it's kind of like people, I've heard sometimes, it's like, I'm not cut out for that. And I'm like, neither are the people that are in there right now. Like,
Exactly.
many of them
Exactly.
no experience in anything. And I'm like, and if you've fought for recovery, you fought for community, those things, you already have an opportunity to bring something else to the table. And I think this is where the movement needs to really be focused on, like, yeah, it's uncomfortable to do to do that kind of work, to get into policy, to get into state representation and Senate and those things. But it's like we are making progress in normalizing that this is the American experience. Addiction is a way of life in this country. It's normalized in every other capacity in which addiction shows up, except for substance use disorder, workaholism, being addicted to screwing other people out of their money and their labor and those kind of things. It's celebrated. Like, this is the only addiction we don't celebrate. And so at this point, helping lift people with encouragement up to a place in which they're taking that lived experience into actually making, implementing policy and becoming lawmakers and those things is really the next step. It's going to be a little uncomfortable, but nothing as uncomfortable as most of the shit that a lot of us have survived in substance use and mental health crisis. So,
Well, I think what's sad about it is that the exact same lived experience that makes you most qualified to be able to speak on those issues, makes you most qualified to be a valuable voice in that room, are the same lived experiences that people would be ashamed of and would say, oh, well, people wouldn't vote for me based on this, or this kind of thing. So it's like, we have the stigmas built into the process itself. But you know what it takes? It takes people standing up and not being ashamed of the shit they've been through in their life.
yeah,
That's what it takes.
I have a friend who, unfortunately, is currently behind bars, and we're talking recovery work together. And use this term unconditional transparency, and I've just fallen in love with it, is because that's the way that I've tried to live my recovery. Is all the dirty laundry is out there. There's nothing for anybody to say. Like, it's in a book. I don't care. I will talk about it all with laughter and with seriousness and with compassion and kindness to those that have loved and lost people by it too, but fearlessly with that unconditional transparency. And I loved it when he said it to me in an email a couple of weeks ago, conversation between prison for drug related offenses, and I was just like, that's what this is. Like, that's what it takes. That's what it's all about. That's how recovery comes to fruition. And that's, like, transparency is not the hallmark of government political operations. And so I'm like, well, unconditional transparency in that arena can't hurt. It's, I don't know. Those are, and that's just, I'm trying to have I think having a sense of humor about this, because the realities of it are so, it's so much despair.
Yeah.
And there's so much chaos and insanity. And I mean, if we're going to continue to move forward, they have to find a sense of humor. They have to find a way to, laughing at the intolerance of other people as we're trying to go toe to toe with some of this stuff, is the ridiculousness of it, because it's an addiction in itself to be full of greed, to be full of hatred and delusion in that capacity. And it's like when we wake up from it, it's like life is so much different. It's everybody's in some kind of recovery process.
Yeah.
It's everybody can benefit from putting the brakes on, listening to other people, trying to understand. You have to want to understand, and that's what opened the door for things for me, is realizing my experience that I had and the gratitude for the criminal legal interventions and those things. That can all be true. I can have all those things be true about my experience and still want to change it. Like, people can still disagree with addiction and people using and people living in the streets and still want to change it. Like, it's like we can still be in both of those places. That's being with discomfort. Like, we all need to learn to be with it a little bit more.
Yep. I like that. You know what, Joe? I'm taking that. I'm sorry, I don't know who your friend is, but no, you can just tell them that I'm taking that unconditional transparency. I'm going to take that to the bank.
Yeah, I love it. It's just, it means, it says so much in that statement.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's anyway, whatever. It's interesting to think about in that context, and I think in a lot of other contexts, you know what I mean? I think that being dishonest about yourself, and this is something I've said since I was 14 years old. I won't tell you how many years that's been, but whatever. Anyway, is that, if you lie about something, that basically means you're ashamed of it, because you know what I mean? That's showing your shame. If you feel like you need to lie about something, that's showing your shame. And it's not to say that, like, it's not like a judgment call on anyone. It's just to say that you're not proud of that part of yourself, or you're not proud of what you did. You're not proud of it. Okay, that, and that's not a judgment statement, but at the same time, I want to be proud of everything that I did. And even if I'm not proud of something that I did, I want to be proud that that was part of the process that brought me to where I was, right? Another quote for myself, because apparently I'm doing that today, is my path may not be straight and narrow, but it led me where I was today. And that's, I grew up in the church, so that's where the straight and narrow pathway, blah, 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 that kind of stuff, whatever. But at the same time, it led me where I was today. And if I'm not proud of the things that brought me those experiences that brought me to understand this, or to realize something that I wouldn't have normally seen. And, I've been in some pretty interesting places, and you say, wow, this is really interesting. I bet all the moms on the schoolyard don't have that experience and they don't understand that, but
Sure.
hey, I'm not ashamed of the fact that that's where I came from. I'm proud of the fact that I used it to be a better person, or to be who I am, or something like that. I'm going off on a rant now. I'm sorry.
I like that, because
One's
I think
leading.
it's what's missing is people not bringing, like, what I hear you saying is bringing your whole self,
Mm,
to an experience. Like, we're not leaving, whether they're stories or experience, we're not leaving them behind. It's all part of the package. And I think so much of shame and alienation and stigma in our community is, it's where it's not allowing people to be whole, not bring them their whole self to the table to things. And in many cases, I feel like for me, if I were to leave those parts of the story out, the things that I experienced, the tragedy, the trauma, the loss, the just the despair, I'd be leaving out the aspects of things that gave me a life of understanding and wisdom finally from those experiences. It'd be like denying part of myself. And I think that's part of, like, this, hear about this, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. And it's like, if we're not being our whole selves, like, can we connect? Like, are we able to connect? Like, because it's my belief is it's, like, people experience happiness and joy on a lot of different levels. Like, it's what's happiness and joy for you may not be happiness and joy for me. But like, you're talking about losing somebody that you love to a substance use disorder, to something that should and could be preventable, and those things, that's a pain that a lot of people understand on a common level. I feel like is not the personal loss of those things, but to love and have lost somebody due to something that we feel like has opportunity to change through policy, or just the shared experience of pain, is that stuff. I feel like in my experiences resonates on a lot of very similar levels for people, different than joy and happiness. And so much of our society is about pitching joy as buying this and driving this car and drinking that. Yeah, the best ability we have to connect is through the hard and the traumatic and the tragic experiences. Those are the things that I feel like people can actually connect over, and that gets people to a table having a conversation about how do we stop this crap from happening. Whatever that crap is, there's a lot there. So
Absolutely. All right, well, I'm just gonna leave it on. Wait, what was it we said? Hold on. Unconditional transparency.
I credit my friend Greg in Clallam Bay Correction Center with that.
I'm just I feel like I'm blessed to have met you, and to, kind of get a little picture into your experience and kind of what you're doing with it. I think it's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for coming on, Joe.
Yeah, and Jody, thanks for reaching out. This was a wonderful way to spend my afternoon, and thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, wait, and so real quick, where can people find you? Where can people find the book and things like that?
So me, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and not Twitter so much, but
Yeah.
yeah, you can look me up by Joseph Conniff. That'll probably pull up most of my handles in Seattle, Washington. And my book, Causes and Conditions, is on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble online.
All right. Well, keep in touch. Thank you for coming on, and thanks everyone for watching. If you have the means, please support us on Patreon /Real Progressives. Like, share, and follow, and all that kind of fun stuff. And we will see you next time around.